sing along. Come, let us sing. Come, let us sing. Sing to the legion of Lord.
Our next guest is a particular gentleman who kind of gets into an area that I always find a lot of fun. The many joys that we all have experienced in studying Torah. One of them is when we see science and Torah come together. And if you have continued to study in this realm, you know that science every day is finally catching up with Torah. And so for a person like myself who enjoys those two disciplines together, the study of Torah and science, I really enjoy this next guest. If people ask you if Torah is rocket science, I guess we could say it is in this case, because our next speaker, and we'll read you a little bit about from his CV here. He is not only a PhD in physics. He currently works at the Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins University. He's past chairman of the Space Radar Working Group for the International Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, and past director of space technology and training for the Republic of China. He's lectured all over the world, especially at Asia Torah. And of course, he's also a best-selling author, which is a book I highly recommend. It's called Thinking About Creation, the Eternal Torah and Modern Physics. Dr. Andrew Goldfinger.
Thank you. You no doubt have all noticed that my jacket does not match my pants. My wife is not here. Please nobody tell her. Okay? I've had a wardrobe malfunction. I have the position, I've been given the task of explaining to you the meaning of life between now and lunch. And I'd like to begin by asking how many people here enjoy doing crossword puzzles? Come on, yeah. Why, Josephine, right? Why do you like doing crossword puzzles?
Just like trying to figure it out.
Like trying to figure it out. It gives you pleasure. Right. We are creatures of pleasure, all of us. And we are motivated by pleasure. In some people, I had the experience of going to a conference in Las Vegas in January, and I saw this pursuit of pleasure, very often unsuccessful, by the way, but the pursuit of pleasure. If you've ever been into a casino and you can't avoid it in Las Vegas, you don't see smiling people. Have you noticed that? Why did Mother Teresa work with the lepers in India? It gave her pleasure. Why did Hitler kill Jews? It gave him pleasure. And we all are creatures of pleasure. There are different levels of pleasure, and that's what I want to start talking about. And I want to do this using a structure which I learned from Reb Noach Weinberg, who is the founder of Aish HaTorah. What is the opposite of pain? Pleasure. If you ask people what the opposite of pain is, they all say pleasure. And I'd like to demonstrate to you that that's not correct. How many of you have been to New York City? And how many of you have taken the boat ride around Manhattan Island? So you went through what is called the East River, which is, of course, a euphemism. What is in there is technically water, but in addition to the water, there are other things that we shall not mention here. It is really gross and disgusting. And if you take the boat ride around Manhattan Island, when you go through the East River, it's best to look at the scenery and not the so-called water. So I want you to imagine that you're taking the boat ride around Manhattan Island, going through this disgusting East River, and all of a sudden there's a scream. a small child has fallen off the boat and is going under. Without thinking, you jump over the edge and swim out to the child. The first thing that you encounter is slime all over your body. And there are waves that cause you to swallow whatever it is, this disgusting, gross refuse in the water, which, as I say, we will not mention what's floating there. But you get to the child, you grab the child, they throw you the life ring, and you are hoisted aboard. Everyone is thrilled with what you've done because the child's life has been saved. You, on the other hand, are throwing up. And you go home and you take a shower. And that's not enough. You burn your clothes, you take another shower, collapse into bed, and when you wake up, you take another shower. You just can't get it all off you. Let's fast forward to about 30 years. You're now a lot older, sitting around reminiscing about your life, and someone says to you, "What was the best day of your life?" What do you answer? "I saved the child." Forgotten is the filth, the disgusting refuse that you went through. You were in pain when you saved that child, and yet you had one of the greatest pleasures of your life. So pleasure and pain are not opposites. Rabbi Weinberg points out that the opposite of pain is comfort. What's the opposite of pleasure? Nothing. Numbness. And many of us live our lives in this way, in total numbness. Right? There are different levels of pleasure, and this is very important. Rabbi Weinberg talks about the 5 classes of air travel. Now, you may have not known there are 5 classes. First of all, there's first class, all right? Then there's second class, but nobody wants to be second class, so we don't call it second class. What do we call it? Business class. Then there's third class, which is, economy, which sounds better than steerage, right? Then there's fourth class, which is they have these straps in the aisle, and you stand there and you hold on as the plane is going. And then there's the fifth class, which is you have to hang on to the wings, all right? The pleasure that most people think of is really fifth class pleasure, physical pleasure. And we all know different types of physical pleasure, all right? Some of us, it's food, especially for those of us who are Jewish. I mean, you know the summary of all Jewish holidays? Have you heard this? Every Jewish holiday is summed up with 3 sentences. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. And a friend of mine said, the Mormons believe that the American Indians are the lost tribes. And a friend of mine said it can't be. Because if the Indians were really Jewish, they wouldn't be drinking themselves to death. They'd be eating themselves to death. We're into pleasure. It says in the Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud, that when a person is judged at the end of their life, they're asked, did you come across any fruits, any nice fruits that were permitted, not forbidden, that you didn't eat? And if so, you're held accountable. You're accountable for avoiding permitted pleasures. And we'll see why shortly, I hope. But there's something which is higher class than physical pleasure. Money can bring physical pleasure. So I come up to, who's a parent here? A parent. And your name is?
No.
Joe? There's 2 parents here, I think. All right. Yes. Your name is?
Cal.
Cal. So Cal, you like money, right? Yeah, be honest. If I offered you $1,000, you'd take it. I'm not saying you're motivated purely by money. Unless I tell you what. You have some kids? Mm-hmm. Okay. Your youngest child's name is? Aaron. And I come and I say, hey, I'll give you $100,000 for Aaron. What are you going to tell me? No way. No way. Because the pleasure of love for another person trumps physical pleasure. It's a higher class of pleasure. And we will not trade a higher class pleasure for a lower class in any amount. It's not going to happen, all right? And we're talking about normal people. There are all sorts of pathologies that exist, but we're not talking about that. Love is so important. And what do I mean by love? We're corrupted by Hollywood. In Hollywood, he looks at her and she looks at him, and they fall in love, right? And they get married. Now, do people get married on that basis? Yeah, we have a name for them, right? We call them divorcees, right? No, that's an exaggeration. But there are people, unfortunately, in our society who make their decisions based on falling in love rather than loving. Love, well, I'm not going to ask this question to people in the audience now, but for those of you who are married and love your spouses, you know that it doesn't always feel good. When my daughter, my first child, was born, and she came home for the first night, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and she had been crying for an hour, and my wife was asleep, and I had no idea what to do, and nobody to call, and she's crying and crying and crying. I figured I have to wake my wife up, and I looked at her, and I said, let her sleep, she's tired. That was love, but it didn't feel good. And I see some smiles from people who've been married for a while, and they know what I'm talking about, because that's real love. That's a fourth-class pleasure. There's a pleasure which is higher than love, and this is going to be kind of hard to understand. I'm going to tell you a story which is a very disturbing one. There was a man who was in one of the concentration camps, a Jewish man, and he was in a position of some responsibility that the Nazis had put him in, and he had to be involved in picking people who he knew were going to die. I don't know the details of it. And one of them was his son, who had been picked. And he had enough power to substitute someone else. And he didn't do it, because it was wrong. And it crushed him, because he could have. He went around saying to people, look what I did, and ended up in very bad shape. What he had done was to exercise integrity, doing the right thing, which in his case trumped love for his son. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right that just because of his power he should cause another person to die. And as we saw last night, indeed from a halakhic viewpoint, he probably did the right thing. You can't substitute one person for another. So that's an even higher level of pleasure. What is higher than that? And this is even harder to understand. Second-class pleasure is something that a group of us met to discuss this. We came up with the term legacy, immortality. Leaving something of yourself in this world which is permanent, having a permanent effect and good effect on the world. Some people don't reach this. There's a joke, you know that comedians, by the way, professional comedians, have very high incidence of depression. Any of you fans here of Red Skelton? Or do people still remember him? There's some people who don't know him. In his will, he directed that all the films and all of his works be destroyed because he was an extremely depressed person. And a lot of it was saved, and some of it was destroyed. It's very common that comedians, in their humor, are expressing something they feel. So there's a joke that's told by Woody Allen, and he says, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality by not dying. All right? That's a good joke. But what kind of emotion is he feeling? Terror at death. I knew a couple who have passed on, and the man, before he died, was terrified, knew he was dying, he was terrified of death. The woman came to terms with it, with her illness. Now, nobody wants to die, but we're all going to, probably. Depends on when Mashiach comes, when the resurrection comes. To be terrified of death is different than not to want to die. And if you look at Woody Allen's humor, when he says, you know, I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there when it happens. There's this theme of being terrified by death. And the idea of leaving something behind, you know, immortality in that way, is not there. Is not there. So in his humor, you don't have the appreciation of this higher level of pleasure. But what is the highest level of pleasure? The highest that there is. And this, in the group of us who are discussing it, we came to call hodah. Doesn't seem to be a term for it in English. Hodah in Hebrew means recognition or appreciation. Recognition that there is something greater than us. All right? That everything that comes in this world has a source. That source is Hashem, the master of the universe, Ribbono Shel Olam, the master of the universe. And we are but reflections or subsidiary to God. If we can achieve that, then we have reached the highest level of pleasure. Now, I'm of the Hasidic persuasion, and my Rebbe is the Bostoner Rebbe. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Bostoner Rebbe. You know, there are Rebbes who, Satmar Rebbe came from a town called Satmar. Lubavitcher Rebbe came from Lubavitch movement originated in Lubavitch, which was in Lithuania, and so on and so forth. And the Bostoner Rebbe comes from a town called Boston, which is further to the west than those cities by a good bit. And he has said, it is very unusual for a Rebbe to consult to an interview, a personal interview. But there was a personal interview with him, and he was asked how he is able to give such good advice to people. And in my life, he gave me tremendous advice, which was incredibly wise in many, many areas. And he said, I don't know. He says, I have to rely upon God. Somehow, I'm never sure what I'm going to say. I allow God to put the words in my mouth. I'm not much. He's achieved a level which few of us can achieve, of total recognition that everything comes from God, and then it does. And sometimes it actually puzzles him. When I was a student, and I was in the process of getting interested in a more observant Jewish lifestyle, I had some conflict with a certain relative about it. And I went home for Pesach, for Passover, and during the first Seder, this relative made fun of me with my interest in what was going on to such an extent and so brutally that my mother went into the other room and started crying. I was terribly upset. And then it passed. And then after Pesach, I went up to Boston. And as the situation was in the 60s, when the Rebbe was very, very active. Nowadays, he's a lot older, and he doesn't have the energy that he did. Students would hang around his house. And I came in, I said, how was Pesach? And they all said, Pesach was terrific, and the Sidarim were terrific. But it's funny, during the middle of the first Seder, he seemed to get very upset. And then it seemed to pass. And then he discovered I was outside, and he called me into his office, and he said, what happened during the first Seder? He knew something had gone on that had upset me. Didn't know what it was. Again, receiving. The highest, well, actually not the highest, the bound, actually it's the lowest. The lowest of the level of what are called the Spheros and Kabbalah, we won't get into it, it's called Malchus, or kingship. And it may surprise you that in Jewish thought, kingship is feminine. It's a feminine quality. Because the king, the proper king, is not the powerful one, but the one who receives God's power and enables it to express itself. So this is Hodah, the highest pleasure that we can have. How do we get to Hodah? How can we achieve this? So in order to explore this with you, I want to play a little card game. Nothing up my sleeve. I have a little deck of cards here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a card on the wall. If I talk really loud, can you hear me? Yes. I'll try doing it without the mic just for a few minutes. And you're getting me on here, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm just at random going to put a card over here. Can you guys see it over there? Okay. And I'm going to, with your help, build up a sequence of cards. Oh, there they are. A sequence of cards, starting with this one and working our way across. And I'd like you to help me by picking the card. Cal, you haven't had a chance to speak first. So, oh, just me, you're Cal. And he is?
Doug.
Doug. Doug hasn't had a chance to speak yet. So would you pick the next card in the sequence?
The next card, any card I want.
Pick a card.
Queen of Spades.
Queen of Spades, okay? No, you can't have it. Josephine, would you pick a card? Pick a card to make our sequence. Jack of Clubs. No, you can't have it. What is your name?
Jack.
Jack.
I was going to say the Jack of Clubs.
You are, but you can't have that one. What you pick?
Okay, I'll take the King of Spades.
No. And your name is?
Mona,
Mona, would you pick a card?
they've used all of them, so what can I choose?
Choose a card.
I will try the Jack of Diamonds.
Yes, you can have the Jack of Diamonds.
This is a random sequence.
There's the end of it. Jack of Diamonds. Okay, we're going to continue because this is all important Torah stuff. Who's going to pick the next one? I'll volunteer. Yes, your name is?
Allison,
Allison.
I want the one you want.
Allison, we have to be courageous in life.
The one on your far left.
Which is what?
I don't know, I can't see that far.
You can't see that far.
Jack of Hearts, please.
The Jack of Hearts. No, you can't have Jack of Hearts. Next. Yes.
7 o'clock. Or the club.
9 o'clock.
9 of clubs, yes. You look pretty confident then. Were you confident?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
George.
George. Do you think you could pick the next two ones correctly?
Maybe.
Say it loudly.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, let's see if you can pick the next two cards correctly. There we go. Next one, Jack, is?
Queen of Hearts.
Queen of Hearts, yes. Your name is Jack, right?
George.
George. Okay. George seems to be doing pretty well here. And we'll let you pick another one now. See how well you're doing.
Deuce.
Two of clubs. Yes, that's a good card. Would you explain what you were just doing?
He was going red, he was going red. 3 of them would be one color, the other would be the color you wanted.
So, you claim there's a pattern here. What is the pattern that you were trying to create?
Black, red,
Alternating colors, black, red, black, and then the next one you would pick a red card. Okay. Does everyone understand what George has done now? Okay. Now I want to ask you a question. Why did God create the world? Okay. Hopefully this will all come together, okay? It never has, but this could be like the first time. Why did God create the world? Surprisingly, there is an answer that is given to that question by the Ramchal. The Ramchal was Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and the Vilna Gaon, of whom we have heard, has said that the Ramchal had the deepest understanding of Judaism as a system of anyone he had encountered. And this is the Vilna Gaon who said this. And that he would have crawled across Europe on his knees to have the opportunity to learn from him. His profession, by the way, is he was an optician. He was a lens grinder. Any lens grinders here? I know there's someone who uses lenses, but no lens grinders here. The Ramchal wrote a book called Derech Hashem, the way of God, the way of Hashem. And he asks the question, why did God create the world? And he gives an answer. And this is an answer we'll say kivayachal. Kivayachal means as much as we're able to say or understand to God, which is like kind of zero. He said that God wanted to do an act of perfect altruism, to bestow good on another being. Now, why did God want to do this? No idea. But he wanted to. So he had to create a being who would receive the good. And that's who we are. The world was created only because of us, as an arena in which we act. God didn't need to create the world. God has no needs. We were created to be the recipients of that good. What is that good that God wishes to bestow on us? It is the ultimate pleasure, which is recognition of God, the first-class pleasure that we spoke about. Now, what does it mean to recognize God? It means to be close to God. So closeness to God, the highest pleasure, is why we were created, and it is what the world is about and what the meaning of life is. What does that mean, to be close to God? Instead of a mile away, you're 2 inches away? What does closeness mean in the spiritual realm? So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan said the following. And by the way, if any of you have had a chance to read Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's books, they're all worth reading. There is one for sale out here, The Real Messiah. He unfortunately passed away at the tragically early age of 48. I'm going to give you a personal statement that I kind of feel that maybe he was taken from us because we were not worthy of him. But that's just a feeling that I have. Wrote a lot of stuff in English, which is all worth reading because he understood a lot about Torah and he understood us, modern people, both. And he said that in the spiritual realm, closeness is defined as similarity. Things are close if they are similar. So if we are to experience this ultimate pleasure of being close to God, we need to make ourselves similar to God. How can we do that? I mean, what does it mean to be similar to God? What is God's principle? Well, God doesn't have qualities or attributes, but when we think of God, what is one of the first things that we think of? God is the creator, right? Before, one of the speakers mentioned Einstein, that he recognized God. But his picture of God was different than ours, I have to say. I'll say a little bit more later in the talk. He saw God as the creator, but he didn't sort of believe that God, after he created the world, was that much involved in it, right? But even at that level, anyone who has the concept of God, of one God, is that God is the creator. So if we are to achieve closeness to God and achieve the ultimate pleasure, we must become creators. What do we create? The answer is ourselves. We create ourselves as perfected moral and spiritual beings. There used to be a slogan that was used by the United States Army, and they stopped using it. It was a recruiting slogan, and it was a great slogan, and I suggest that all of us, Noachides, Jews, and everyone, take this as our lifelong motto. Anyone know what slogan I'm talking about? Be all that you can be. I mean, what better thought is there than to be all that you can be? They seem to have gone in a different direction now, the Army now. Now it's Army strong. You know, and then it was an army of one, which nobody quite understood. But they're not using that anymore. Let's take it as our motto. Be all that you can be. perfect ourselves morally, perfect ourselves spiritually. And we're given a roadmap for doing this, which is what the Torah is. And if we create ourselves as these beings, then we become creators and close to God. Now, in order for us to be able to do this, there's one very important ingredient that we need, and that is free will. We have to be able to choose whether we do it or we don't. Otherwise, nothing happens. Any of you who are parents have experienced tremendous anxiety when you began to let your children do certain things. It starts when you let go of their hand when they're walking, knowing they may fall flat on their faces. It extends to the first day that they say, hey, can I have the keys to the car? And you let them drive without you being in the car. And you don't sleep that night, by the way. It extends to dating, when they're choosing a marriage partner. And with my kids, I told them all that I'd be glad to talk over things with you about this person and give you my feelings, but the decision has to be yours. And with one of my kids, it was an agonizing decision. And I had to say to him, this takes more wisdom than I have. You have to make that decision. God has to let us go and give us free will. And then we have the potential for achieving this greatest pleasure of imitating God and being close to God. How do we get free will? Are there any dentists here? Any dental hygienists? No? Your dad was a dentist. That's close enough, but I'm not going to ask you to leave the room. You can stay anyway, even though you're closely associated with a dentist, because I'm going to say something negative about the dentist. I hate going to the dentist. You too? But it has nothing to do with my dentist. It has to do with the dental hygienist. And when I come in, she stands there, you know, and she says, do you like those teeth? I say, yeah. She said, then proceeds to tell me all the things I'm supposed to do with my teeth each morning. Now, I'm old enough to remember when there was only one thing you had to do each morning, and that was brush, up and down. By the way, you don't brush up and down anymore. Now you brush side to side with little circular motions, right? Now, if you brush up and down, your teeth are going to fall out, you know, little circular motions. And when I was a kid, get a good hard toothbrush. Nowadays, get the softest one you can get. But brushing's not enough, because you have to brush, you have to floss, then there's stimudents, there's anti-plaque rinse, scaling tools, right? Disclosing tablets. Any of you use disclosing tablets, which tell you where you should brush and everything like that? And it's easily, if I did everything she said, 45 minutes every morning with my mouth. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it is a nice thing for a man to have a hobby. But I choose a different hobby, all right? Now, suppose the nature of the world was such that if you didn't floss just once, all your teeth fell out immediately. How many people would floss every morning? Everyone would do it. Suppose the nature of the world was such that if a person took one puff from a cigarette, they immediately started coughing and couldn't breathe due to lung cancer. How successful would cigarette advertising be? Not very much. But that's not the way it is. If you don't floss, are you going to get into trouble? Well, there's a good chance. You know, some people have perfect teeth, but not many. Most people will develop problems if they don't floss, but it's not going to be this year. It may not be for 20 or 30 years. What about people who smoke? Will the effect be this year? Well, it might be, but it's more likely to be in 20 or 30 years, of course, when it's too late that they notice it. Because the effects are so removed from the actions, we have free will as to whether or not we do these things, whether we choose to do them. If the effects were immediately there, we would not do them and lose our free will. If we could see God looking over our shoulders at all times, we would lose our free will. Do you know that every single Superman comic ends in the same way? What happens? Superman flies away, right? Well, why does Superman, at the end of every Superman comic, have to fly away? Because if he hung around, he would get to be a real drag. You know, hey, Jimmy Olsen, I saw you took some coffee from the coffee pot. Did you refill it? Just a minute. You're a little overtime on the parking meter. Put in your quarter, you know. Hey, I was looking over your expense account, you know, and I'm not quite so sure about that charge you had there on this sort of thing. We don't want that from Superman. We want him to save us and help us and then get out of there, right? We don't want him looking over our shoulder. He's too honest, all right? Now, with Superman looking over our shoulder, we don't have free will. Who's the governor of the state? Oh, this state. Jeb Bush. Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah, that was last year.
That was last year.
Chris.
Christ. Man or woman? Man. Mr. Christ? What's his first name? Chuck Christ. So I go to Chuck Christ and I say, Governor Christ, I have a new program here for the state of Florida. I can take your most rotten, miserable, evil prisoner from your prison system, and in 1 week I can turn him into a good person. And he says, wow, I'd like to see this program work. So I say, listen, I'll be glad to do it, Governor, but in order for me to do it, you have to let me do whatever I want. He says, well, it's worth a try. So I said, release the prisoner in my custody, and I do. He does. And I take a gun and I put it to the prisoner's head. And I say, I'm going to follow you around all week. If you do anything wrong, if you are unkind or impolite to a person even, I'm going to pull the trigger and blow your brains out. Now, at the end of the week, will the prisoner have done anything wrong? No. At the end of the week, will the prisoner be a good person? No. Hasn't been affected in any way. Because the punishment is immediate. So if we are to have free will, which that prisoner would not have, the consequences of our actions have to be somewhat removed from us. And that is why God has to hide. And there's a concept in Torah called Hester Panim. It literally means hiding the face, meaning the face of God. And it usually refers to history, that there are times of Hester Panim, times when God is more hidden, such as the present age, I would say. But it also applies to things that happen on a continuing basis in our lives, that God has to hide, because otherwise we would lose our free will, our ability to make choices based upon what's right and wrong, not upon reward and punishment, and God's going to zap us right away if we do something wrong. What is the word for universe or world in Hebrew? Ha'olam. Ha'olam. The root of that word is ayin lamed mem, alem. If I make that into a verb, la'alem, what does it mean? To hide or conceal.
Ignore.
Excuse me?
Ignore.
Ignore. Literally, in Hebrew, the world is the hiding place. The place where God conceals himself and says, come find me. Come find me. It's a cosmic game of hide and seek that we can play if we want to. And what we find is the greatest of all pleasures if we play the game. Now, how does God hide and conceal himself or herself? In a myriad of ways, and a lot of what's involved in the so-called pursuit of Kabbalah is understanding some of what's hidden in the world. Now, I will tell you not only that I am not a Kabbalist, but I will also tell you that I know nothing about Kabbalah. I know some Kabbalah words, and you can buy Kabbalah books, and you can read them. But lekabel means to receive, and Kabbalah means that which is received from a teacher who knows it. And much of what is called Kabbalah it's not in books. There was a great Kabbalist in Jerusalem, the Nazir he was called, and he spoke about Gershon Sholem. Any of you heard of Gershon Sholem? He was a secular scholar who studied Kabbalah, and he produced books and volumes about Kabbalah. And this person referred to him as an accountant. He says, why an accountant? Because an accountant knows where every cent of a rich person's money is, but none of it belongs to him. And you can use words, and I will use some words with you, but I don't really pretend to know what they mean. Because what is really involved is not a verbal thing. There are things that can be transmitted only through experience. Any of you fans of Yo-Yo Ma? Yeah. My favorite cellist. Suppose I tell you, and your name is? Hanan? Say again? Pamela. So you hear that there's going to be a Yo-Yo Ma concert coming up next week, given twice. And after the first concert, you read the review. And it's a 4-page review of how he played. And the whole score, the music is printed there with a commentary that says at this point he played it dolce to such an extent that tears came to the audience's eyes. And in this part it was presto, and people were almost standing up from the excitement. And over here there was a rubato, and the note was held to such an extent that it created a tension, and goes through the whole thing. And after reading that review, you say, wow, I'm so glad I read that review, because now I don't have to go to the concert tomorrow night. Is that your reaction? No. Oh, I've got to go. Well, why? You now know everything about how he's going to play. Everything there is to know. But it's not the same as experiencing it. And that is the relationship between Kabbalah words and Kabbalah. And it's why I don't know anything about it. I can read books, I can, things like that. Having said that, and being again of the Hasidic persuasion, Hasidism was originated by the Baal Shem Tov. Hasidism is an approach within Judaism. There are many approaches. We're fortunate in the world today that we can be exposed to many approaches and choose those which resonate in our personalities. A couple of centuries ago, it was more limited because you couldn't communicate that widely. And the Baal Shem Tov kind of gave us permission to talk about Kabbalistic things in a way, to a certain level, not ever really believing that we're getting into the essence of what it is. By the way, are there real Kabbalists? Yeah, there are. You are not looking at one of them. And the Kabbalists talk about God concealing himself on a number of levels. First of all, they confront a philosophical question that we can speak about, even though we will not understand these words. And that is, how could a perfect unity, which is God, proceed to bring forth an imperfect world of multiplicity? And they introduce a concept called the tzimtzum, or contraction, that God somehow contracted his pure unity essence to leave over a vacated space for the world to exist. Do not take any of these terms literally. If you are inclined to take them literally, better forget the whole thing. So God had to contract and hide himself. And the Kabbalists speak about, therefore, a number of levels of reality, the lowest of which is the one that we perceive part of. It's called the Olam Asiya, the world of doing, or the world of action, or whatever. this physical world, but more than this physical world. It is this physical world plus some of its spiritual components, which is in the Olam Asiyah. Higher than that is something called the Olam Yetzirah, the world of formation. Higher than that is the Olam Habriya, the world of creation. Higher than that is the Olam Atzilus, the world now of closeness to God, if you will. And finally, the highest world, which, if you have paid any attention to Rabbi Bach's talk, will not surprise you, is called Adam Kadmon, primal man. Again, the word Adam. That's a world. Remember that the Adam embodies the world, not literally, all right? We're not talking about real noses here, although, well, other discussion. Now, what do these worlds mean? There's an analogy which is given by Kabbalists, and it's the following. Let's talk about a rich person giving tzedakah, giving charity to a poor person. Rich person takes the coin, puts it in the hand of the poor person. Okay? The coin is like the Olam Asiyah. It is the thing which is being transferred. It is the goal of the entire action. This physical world that we have here and its spiritual components is the goal of the creation. It's here. Not illusory, just not the ultimate reality. The hand of the poor person accepting the coin is like the Olam Yetzirah, the world of formation. It receives as best we can understand that. The stretching forth of the arm of the rich person is like the Olam Habriya, the creative force. The hand of the rich person holding the coin to give it forth, the source of the value, is like the Olam Atzilus, the closeness. And the intention and will of the rich person to give is like Adam Kadmon, the highest level. Again, just an analogy. Traditionally, there were certain requirements that people had to have before they studied Kabbalah. One is they had to be married. One is they had to be over the age of 40. That's the easiest one. And the third is they had to be Torah scholars. Nevertheless, the real depth, the real deep study of Kabbalah was discouraged because there's danger involved in it. And there's a danger of madness. Among the various dangers, there's a danger of... Many of the great Kabbalists died young. The Arizal, I think, was 41 when he died, I believe. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, as I mentioned, was 48. Many of the Kabbalists died young. And the Talmud talks about people getting involved in things and coming to bad ends. Ben Zoma went mad from studying some of these things. Talmud says only Rabbi Akiva went in peace and returned in peace. And Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, I don't know how many of you have heard of him. Somehow when I say he's a brilliant man, it doesn't capture. Is that correct? It's not adequate. It's not adequate to say that he's a brilliant man. But I heard him speak once, and he was comparing the reading of Dostoevsky and the reading of Hermann Hesse. And he said, if you really study Dostoevsky carefully, you will profit from it. But if you really study Hermann Hesse carefully, you may go mad. And for any of you who have read Dostoevsky and Hesse, Dostoevsky is very conceptual, and Hesse is on the borderline of other things. My Rebbe says, worry about kindergarten first, okay? We talked about this business of giving the coin and tzedakah. Every time you make a charitable donation, all of those 5 worlds are being influenced by that activity. Every time you go to the bank, and as the teller looks away, there's some money lying there that without seeing you could just snatch, and you don't do it, and you have performed a mitzvah, even though it's a negative mitzvah. These 5 worlds are being influenced. And if you think about it too much, you can go crazy thinking about this. So as my Rebbe says is, give the money, don't take the money. God will take care of the rest. The world is here. This is where we are. This is where we act. And as Rabbi Bakst said, Olam Haba, we don't know what that is. We'll find out, okay. But right now, there's things to do. So that's what we worry about. So God hides in this world, and we are to act in the world as we understand it. I'd like to tell you one of the ways in which God does hide in the world. And there are a myriad of ways, but I want to talk about one of the ways that God hides in this Olam Asiya, in this lowest level of reality that includes the physical world. And that is through physical law. Physical law. So let me show you how this works. I have here a roll of masking tape. I'm going to hold it here and let go. You ready? What happened?
Gravity.
First, no, what did you see? It fell down. If I let go again, what will happen? Fall down. Okay. Now, why does it fall down? Gravity. Wrong. The reason that it falls down is because God made it fall down. If God wanted to, could God make it go up? Yeah. So why is it that every time I do it, God makes it go down? Well, first of all, it keeps me employed, so I'm very grateful for that. All right. But why does God make it fall down all the time? That's what God. Why does God want that in the terms of what we've been saying here today? If God acts in a pattern that I can observe, I can call that pattern a law of nature and say there's no God, there's a law of nature. If every time I let go of the tape, it falls down, I observe it carefully day after day after day, and I say, oh, there's a law of nature, it's called gravity, things fall down. Now I make measurements, I refine it, I make the law more accurate, but God always does it the same way. After a while, I sort of catch on, you know? This is what you do with your kids, right? You train your kids by doing something again and again and again and again, you know? If you go out into the street, you're going to get a timeout. Go into the street again, you get a timeout. You notice 50 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. What would I have said? You get slapped, yeah. See, my middle son has a problem with his daughter. They have a timeout corner for her, and she loves it there. Something wrong here. All right? So, you know, the punishment has to fit the crime, right? It's like I was saying before to Rabbi Avenir. You know what the punishment is for bigamy? 2 wives. Anyway. But what was I saying? The child, after a while, gets the point that if I go out into the street, something bad's going to happen. Now, they don't understand that it's for their own good. It's because I don't want you to get hurt, right? They kind of don't learn really what is the right thing yet, but it's good enough. All right? A physicist watches this over and over again and says there's a law of gravity. Okay? Now, we played a card game. Remember that? And I put a card here, and I asked you to make a sequence. And then we picked this, and then George picked these 2. Why are these the 2 correct cards? Boy, you're all afraid to answer now.
Fits a pattern.
Fits a pattern. No! Your name in the pink is?
Eileen.
Eileen. Are you the one, or was it the woman behind you who said, what did you say when I said pick a card?
I want what you want.
You want what I want. She was closer to the truth. The reason that those cards were correct is because I said so. Did I, when we started this game, ever say there was going to be a pattern? What did I say? We're going to make a sequence of cards. George comes along and observes a pattern, right? George is a scientist. Are you a scientist? Are you a scientist? No, you should be. Because you think in that way. And he came up with a hypothesis that it was red, black, red, black. We call that George's law. All right? And he then, as a good scientist, proceeded to test George's law by experiment. Performed 2 experiments, got them right, and said, I have not discovered the truth, although some scientists would say that, but I have confirmed the hypothesis. Right? Really, what's going on over here is that I am choosing the cards. Right? George found a pattern, that I acted in a pattern knowing that George or someone would figure it out. And if George wants to now, he can say there's a game here, and there's a rule to the game, so that when I pick out some cards, you know, and I say, George, what's the next card? And you say, King of Diamonds, and I say, no. Pick another card.
Queen of Diamonds.
Queen of Diamonds, and I say no. George, pick a card. Which? King of Spades? 10 of Spades, yes. What happened? What happened?
Change the pattern.
Changed the pattern? It's a miracle. Throughout all of history, which was a sequence of 5 cards, it was red on black and black on red. And the scientist says it must be red on black and black on red because that's a law of nature. And according to George's law, that's what has to happen. It can't happen another way. Every time I let go of the tape, it goes down. It can't go up. Wrong. If on some occasion God wants it to go up, he makes it go up, and we say, it's a miracle, it's a miracle. It's no more miraculous when it goes up than when it goes down. And there really is no law here except my will in this game. Hey, I got to play God. Why do we study physics? Einstein said that he studied physics to know how much freedom God had in creating the world. What are the basic laws of physics that constrain reality to know how much freedom God had in making the world? We would say, wrong approach, buddy. Or how do you say buddy in German? I don't know.
Kamerad.
Kamerad. That has political, yeah.
But Einstein was before.
He was before, yeah, before that. No, God created the laws of physics. God is not limited by the laws of physics. A number of years ago, I spoke with a physicist named Edward Tryon. And Edward Tryon is I've never met him, but I spoke with him by phone. Fascinating, very open, and highly intelligent and nice person who said, please feel free to call me, whenever you want, but always make sure it's somewhere between 2 and 6 a.m. because that's when he's working. And he said he's an atheist. He said he was originally a religious Catholic, and he became an atheist. And he said, because I can explain, he's interested in the Big Bang and the origins of the universe. He says, I can explain everything in nature, everything in the world through the laws of physics. And then he laughed, and he said, but of course that raises the question, where do the laws of physics come from? You see, there has to be an origin to the physics itself. And then we get into the Big Bang, not observing the laws of physics, a whole other thing. and the problem that Stephen Hawking is having, because he kind of showed that the laws of physics don't apply to the origin, and that bothers him philosophically. He's an honest person and trying to find a way around it. Whole other discussions. The main point over here is that God is hiding, and through the laws of physics is one of them. Why do I study the laws of physics? It's fun. It gives me pleasure. And money. And I support my family that way, which is a good thing. And if you can support your family and have fun, that's great. And even better, it's on government contracts. So we don't have to work so hard. Pleasure is what it's all about, and we're playing the game of hide and seek. And if we wish, God gives us the freedom to be atheists and say everything is the laws of physics. There is no God. And usually we're then correct in predicting what happens. We can say it's all the laws of nature and so on, and usually they work. On those few occasions when they don't, and I know of some of them, and many of you may, we call it a miracle. No more miraculous then than when the laws of physics are followed. And in those cases in which the laws of nature have changed and we call it a miracle, the question is, why did God do it at that time? And we talk in Torah about miracles within the laws of nature and miracles outside the laws of nature. And strangely enough, it takes more merit on the part of the person to deserve a miracle within the laws of nature than one outside the laws of nature. And that's a whole other discussion that I'm not going to do with you because I don't understand it myself. The game of hide and seek. God hides and says, come find me, and you can cheat. I gave you a map to find me. It's called the Torah. And you say, just a minute, it tells me that I shouldn't eat the limb of a living animal, right? One of the 7 commandments, which, by the way, is not that uncommon. If any of you come from the West and know what prairie oysters are, they are taken from living animals. And a Noahide, any human being, is not allowed to eat that. Okay? I don't think it's very common around here, but if a person out in the West who eats prairie oysters is taking on the Noahide laws, they've got something to deal with, right? Now, what does that have to do with finding God, right? First of all, by becoming similar to God, by creating yourself and perfecting yourself. And then you do find God, but you have to do it yourself because words will not help you to understand that. I spoke about crossword puzzles at the beginning. For those of you who like crossword puzzles, have you ever had the experience of going on an airplane and you feel like doing a crossword puzzle? So what do? Take the magazine. So you pick up the magazine and you open it up and it's been done. So how do you feel? Disappointed, right? Oh. Well, why? The answer's there. You've been saved all the work. Aren't you happy? No. Because there's pleasure in the hide and seek. There's pleasure in the problem solving. There's pleasure in taking it on because that's the way God created us. Are there people who just want the answer? Yeah. Yeah, there are. And unfortunately, in our society now, there are very deep problems with self-esteem among certain people in our culture because they don't achieve on their own. They've had things given to them, and they expect things given to them, and they expect to get happy, and they don't. And you all know that it's the effort, the self-esteem that comes from achievement, the self-esteem of creating yourself, perfecting yourself, coming close to God through that action. So just as we look forward to doing the crossword puzzle, the rest of our lives, which are going to have varying degrees of ease and difficulty, we remember that those difficulties are what get us there. And of course, since this is, I'm Jewish, and this is a lot of Jews at this conference, and the major Jewish theme we discovered is food. As you all know, the internet is the most powerful tool ever created for spreading misinformation. And one of the things that, if you have not received, you may receive someday, is an email that says NASA scientists calculated the motions of the planets and the sun and the stars, and they found there was a time in history when everything stopped. And that was the time of Joshua. Nonsense. They never did any such calculation. It's complete garbage. So that had to be an example of laws of nature being overridden. Now, there is a controversial person who is no longer living. His name was Immanuel Velikovsky, and many of you may have heard of him. He wrote books in which he tried to unite archaeology with science. And usually my experience, and maybe our archaeologist here can confirm this, is the archaeologists say, well, his archaeology wasn't very good, but his science is terrific. And the scientists say, the science may not be fully accurate, but the archaeology is terrific. I can't comment a lot on that. He claimed to find parallels, and he claimed that on half of the Earth there are traditions of the sun standing still for a day, and on the other hand, half of the Earth there are traditions of it being dark for a day, which would be consistent with the Earth stopping. I don't know if he's right or wrong. I don't know. Velikovsky is, as I say, very controversial. He apparently, I know some people who met him, said he was a very sincere and honest person. And he predicted some things that were correct, such as Venus being very hot and things of the sort. But I'll leave it up to each of you, if you read his books, as to what you do with them. I have no comment, and I'm not qualified of speaking about his books. Yes?
What about setting the exact second of the new moon?
What about setting the exact second of the new moon? Ah, another controversial subject. Here's the deal. We have a calculation of the length of time. Can I take another 5 minutes and say this? The Jewish calendar is what? A lunar calendar or a solar calendar?
Both.
Great. You see, I know this is a non-Jewish audience. I asked a question that has 2 answers, and I got 3. All right, with the Jewish audience, I would have gotten 4, all 4 possibilities, and maybe 10, okay? But you're good, you're getting there. Some said lunar, some said solar, and some said both, all right? Now, some of you could have said neither. That one I didn't hear. The answer is it's both. It synchronizes with the sun and with the moon. Now, in order to synchronize the lunar part of the calendar, when the temple existed, the new moon was observed in Jerusalem. It was observed, and then the witnesses would come to Jerusalem to testify that they saw the new moon. And then the Sanhedrin would say, yes, indeed, the month has begun. Now, we no longer have the same Sanhedrin. The universally accepted Sanhedrin, I'm going to get in big trouble here. We no longer have the temple. There we agree, right? Right, we no longer have the temple. Yet. Yet. By the way, financial advice, invest in Tupperware. You know why? Because when Mashiach comes, the temple is rebuilt. Lives are going to change, because we'll have to worry about what are called tuma and tahara, purity and impurity of objects and things. And our lives will be very complicated. Plastic cannot become tameh, cannot become ritually impure. And the use of Tupperware is going to increase tremendously. So if you want to take it from me, especially in terms of what the market's been doing, Tupperware is the way to go, okay? What was I saying? So when the temple existed, witnesses would come and they would testify they saw the new moon. Now, throughout all of history, the new moon has occurred 29.530589 days after the previous new moon, kind of. Now, where does that number come from? It was known by Chazal, it was known by the rabbis of the Talmud, by a complicated calculation based on the written Torah with a methodology given in the oral Torah. Now, it's hard to observe this because the moon's orbit is not perfectly circular. It's slightly elliptic. So really, the time from, and the Earth's orbit around the sun is slightly elliptic. So really, the time from one new moon to another varies from month to month. This is what's called the time of the molad, which is like the mean or average new moon. But everyone knew it was about 29 and a half days. And by the way, the Torah figure is very, very accurate. And there's controversy as to how this figure was arrived at. The secular scholars say they got it from the Babylonians. A man who I worked with, who was named Robert Newton and specialized in ancient astronomical observations, said that's nonsense, that they couldn't have had it that accurately. And he said they were lucky. And that's a whole other argument in itself. I'm not going to get into. But the fact is that everyone knew the new moon's going to be in 29 and a half days, roughly since the previous one. So why do we need to have witnesses come in? And by the way, that's the part I think that I hope answers your question about the accuracy of it. A friend of mine and myself did a study of how accurate it is. Oh, no, excuse me. I'm confusing it with another study. Never mind. Never mind. It's very accurate. Why have witnesses come in and testify when you know when it's going to be? Now, nowadays, we don't have the witnesses, so we calculate the calendar. But when the temple is restored, we will rely on witnesses again. Why try to have witnesses deal with something and testify to something when you know when it's going to be? It's got to be 29 and a half days. Why does it have to be 29 and a half days? Because it's a law of nature, right? It's been that way throughout all of history. Just a minute here. What's the ultimate reality? It's the laws of nature or it's God? Just because God has made it be 29.530589 days for all of history, does that mean that he has to do it this month? No. So let's wait and see. At least at one point in our lives, it could be another point perhaps, but at one point in our lives, let's recognize God's mastery of the universe and wait and see when it is, thereby saying, God, you're hiding. You're hiding. You know what? We found you. We know you're there. We know you're pulling the strings. Okay, the rest of our lives are not as clear, but in this case, we'll make it clear. And that gets into the whole subject of the new moon and repentance, tshuva, return, whole other subject. But very quickly, tshuva, the Jewish concept of tshuva, what you do when you've done something wrong. I always explain that by a very well-known Jewish story, which you all know. It's just that you never thought of it as Jewish, because it was written by Charles Dickens, and it's called A Christmas Carol. Why do I call that a Jewish story? Because at the end, what does Scrooge do? Does he go into church and beg Jesus to forgive him? No. He corrects his actions. That is the concept of tshuva. He regrets what he did and corrects the actions to the best extent that he can. All right? He's not forgiven by the grace of God. He earns his forgiveness and does something about it. That's a Jewish ending. That's the concept of tshuva. Tshuva makes no sense because tshuva, can I take another 5 minutes? Okay, I'll try to do this in 5 minutes. What is the reward and punishment that we get at the end of our lives? They tell you something, the tzaddik, the righteous person, the rasha, the evil person, when they go into the parking area, where Rabbi Bakst had, I don't think you mentioned it, but above and below your timeline, you had the soul areas of, we can't cover everything here today, but it's where the souls go until Olam Haba, call them heaven and hell. Whether you've been good or bad, you get the same thing. What? What about reward and punishment? Right? Well, here's kind of how it goes. This is an analogy. Imagine that your life is over and you are taken into a huge movie theater. And in the movie theater are all your friends and relatives, all the people you love, and also all the other people in the world and all the people who have existed throughout all of history. And they're about to show a movie. And what is the movie? Your life, with subtitles as to what you were thinking. Now, is this heaven or is it hell? Depends on who you are, right? Here's the deal. If you do tshuva, you've done something wrong in this world, it's going to be in that movie. And you are going to feel it because you'll understand what's right and wrong in this parking space or wherever it is. If you do tshuva, you can have one of two motivations. One of them is tshuva me'yira, tshuva that you're motivated by fear, and the other is tshuva me'ahava, tshuva from love. They both work. If you're motivated by fear because, I don't want to see the movie with that in it, I'm scared, and you do tshuva, not that you say, God forgive me, but you do what you can to correct yourself, correct the situation. It's a process, and you go through the process of tshuva because you're scared of the punishment. When that movie is shown, that is edited out. It's gone. Now here's the stranger thing. If your motivation is not fear, I mean, you're afraid, but more than that, you say, Master of the universe, I violated the whole reason you created this world. I have hurt you, and you're motivated by your love for God. When that movie is shown, that action is turned into a mitzvah. It's turned into something good. I can't do that with the analogy, but it counts as a mitzvah. Now, all of tshuva makes no sense. You're changing the past. You're changing the movie. It's a miracle. You can't change the past. That is a law of nature, that the past can't be changed. What is a law of nature? It's a way that God hides. On Rosh Chodesh, the day that we have the new moon, we say, gotcha, I'm going to wait and see when this new moon comes about. And I'll see when you make it, and recognize that you can change the laws of nature if you want. Well, I also want you to change the laws of nature by allowing me to do tshuva. And that's why the new moon is a particularly good day to do tshuva. And I'll finish and let you get to lunch with a quote from Mark Twain, which I hope I can get right. He said that October is a particularly dangerous month to speculate in the stock market. The other particularly dangerous months are November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, and September. All right? And I think that we can finish by saying that the day of the new moon is a particularly good day to do tshuva. The other particularly good days are the other days of the month. Lunch.